If you've just gone to hop onto Battlefield's new Battle Royale Redsec, and then realised that not only are all your settings messed up, but also that the settings seem a little bit complicated, you're not alone. Which is why in today's video, I'm covering all of the best settings for Battlefield and Redsec, whether you are starting from a new and hopping on for the first time, or whether you've been playing Battlefield 6 and you just want to improve your settings. We really are starting from scratch here, and we're starting with the accessibility settings. Now obviously if you do need some of these extra accessibility settings switched on, by all means do so, but I'm going to make some recommendations based on most players. So for that, we want menu narration switched off. Obviously that is personal preference, but it can drive you insane if you don't need it. I also recommend switching off subtitles, as this can just be a distraction. For some of the other audio settings here, we are going to perfect them a little bit later on, so you can leave them for now. And that can be said for a few of these, but I would go on to color profiles and change this to tritanopia. So this is technically a colorblind setting, but I do think it makes the game look that little bit better. For world brightness, put this down to 45. The map is already pretty bright, and in fact, a little bit too bright in areas. And some of the images can seem a little bit washed out, making some of the enemies overlap with the environment. And then for camera effects, we've got world motion blur and weapon motion blur, put these all the way to 0. Turn off your infantry HUD motion, put your camera shake down to minimum, which is 50. Switch on, reducing your sprint camera bobbing, and then switch off the last two settings as well. And then for controller vibration, I'd switch that off, but that one is personal preference. Okay, so they are some of the very basics, and now we want to go into controller settings. So we want to go into edit settings, and then edit controller settings, and then here we've got aim sensitivity. I've got mine on 42.5, and this feels pretty good in terms of snappiness, but also not too quick that you are just missing your shots. For field of view, I've got that on 116. You definitely want it on 110 or above, but always keep in mind that the higher you go with your FOV, the lower you're going to get your frames per second. And the severity of that depends on the system you play on. So if you are playing on older generation consoles, you're really going to struggle for frames per second. For zoom sensitivity coefficient, put this down to 110. And then for the aim input curve, I've got mine on BF1 and BF4, which if you are a COD player, this is probably the closest you're going to get to dynamic. But either way, it does make the game feel a little bit more snappy and certainly a little smoother. And then for the stick input acceleration presets, standard is absolutely fine, with the left to right acceleration on 50. Now obviously if any of this is too slow or too quick, you can just do some fine tweaking on your end. And then for these, we can pretty much leave them for now, because we are going to be doing some tweaks on the button layout mapping in just a moment. One of the other important settings though that we do want to change is the infantry zoom aim sensitivity. This basically meaning the sensitivity you're on when you're actually aiming down your sights. Now because the sensitivity we've just set above is actually pretty quick, we want to put this down to about 85. This is going to help us massively when we're aiming down our sights to actually be able to lock onto enemies. Another important setting is the interact and reload. Make sure this is on prioritize interact. And then the rest here are okay on the default setting. But now we want to come down to the control mapping, and here we can map out some actions to specific buttons. So if you are used to playing on a button layout, which is a little bit unique, or you just have some personal preferences, this is a great place to implement them. Now I can leave you to do many of those things on here. Something I will highlight though, is that jump shotting and things like that are not really a big thing on Battlefield. It's a little bit slower, but sliding and crouching are a thing, so you may want to prioritize those to be a little more natural. So if you go with something like the tactical layout, which it would be on Call of Duty, which is basically assigning crouch to your right analog being clicked in, that's a very natural way to be able to do that movement. Now the other thing we want to do while we're here, which is applicable for everyone, now is to change your sprint to forward on the left analog. So this basically means as soon as we click forward in the game, we're going to go straight into a sprint, meaning we can just move around the map a lot quicker. Okay, now the next thing we want to do is come all the way down to the bottom of these controller settings and go to controller tuning. So here we've got control vibration again, switch that off. But a very important thing here are the dead zone settings. So generally you want dead zone settings to be on as low as they can go until you start getting stick drift, which is basically when your character starts moving on its own because you've got a little bit of wear and tear on your controller. But the reason we want it on as low as we can go is we get a super responsive controller, essentially minimizing input delay. So for our left stick, we really do want to go very low here. I've got 1, and then I've got the axial dead zone on 6 with the max input threshold of 75. So this means not only do we have a very fast response time, it means that we have a slightly quicker max threshold as well. So for example, if we think about sprinting, we can get into that very quickly here. And then for the right stick, I've got these slightly different. Now my center dead zone here is 7, and that's because I actually do have quite a bit of stick drift on this controller. I would love to go a little bit lower though. Again, axial dead zone on 6 is fine, fine. And then the max input threshold, I've actually got on 100 here. Now, obviously your right stick is more responsible for the aiming and locking onto enemies. So with this one, you need a little bit more of fine control. And then for the triggers, I've got 0 on the dead zones and 100 on the max thresholds. Okay, so that's everything for the controller settings. Now let's head over to graphics. Now here for the performance preset, we do actually have two great options. So we've got balanced mode, which makes the game look nicer, but does mean that we have some frame rate variability or even lower frame rates. And then we have performance mode. So the visual quality does look a little bit lower, but we do get reduced input latency and higher frame rates. So if you really are going for performance over what the visuals look like, then I would recommend going for this one. And then like I said a little bit earlier on, for brightness, I've got mine on 45. And then for sharpness, I've actually gone up to 65. This helps us decipher some enemies against some backgrounds. For field of view, that's on 116, as I mentioned earlier. And then for the vehicle third-person field of view, I've got that all the way up on 83. For weapon field of view, put this on wide. This makes our weapon look a little bit smaller, so we can see more of the environment. We've got weapon and world motion blur on 0, camera shake minimized on 50. We're reducing the sprint camera bobbing, and then we're removing a lot of these extra effects that are put on the screen too. It's a shame because the game really does look fantastic with all these. It looks very cinematic, but at the end of the day, if we do want the game to look good, while also getting an advantage over our enemies, making it easier to see them, then a lot of this we just have to take off. And then we just want to head over to the HUD settings, and there's not much to change here, but the one thing that I would change is the minimap size. I'd put this on large, and then for the crosshairs, I'd put the intensity up to 75, and then put the thickness on thick, and that's both for the normal crosshairs and the hit indicator. Okay, now let's hit up the audio settings, and the first thing to change here is the music volume. I've put mine down to 10. Again, it adds a lot of character and a cinematic feel to the game, but it can just be quite off-putting and stop us hearing other important game sounds. So I put it down to 10, and then the commander volume I've put down to 80. For the sound system here, I would just try and match this up to whatever you're using. So for me, it is headphones. If you are using surround sound or quadraphonics, there's options for those as well. And then for the audio mix, I would go War Tapes Val. This makes hearing footsteps really good, whilst not making the audio mix sound too crowded, which is often a complaint when you minimize your dynamic range too much, which is kind of what we have over on Call of Duty a lot of the time. And then for the tinnitus volume, I put mine on 0. Again, it's a nice sound effect if you want to feel immersed, but it is just kind of annoying. Okay, so they are all of the best settings for Battlefield 6 and Redsec right now. I really do hope they help you out and make the game just feel a little bit nicer.